Top of the morning to you, lass. Good morning and welcome to this month's Friday webinar. My name is Michelle Omat, at least for this week is. For all of you that are Irish or want to be Irish tomorrow, we're going to have some fun with this month's topic called the 5 Behaviors of a Cohesive Team. And in case you have any technical difficulties, my left hand, right hand woman is standing by, Dana. Write down her phone number, 515-221-2688. If you have any technical difficulties. We had a fantastic hour at 9 o'clock. We had 45 companies call in. So obviously this topic is of great interest to many of you. For those of you that I know are joining us for the first time, welcome. We want to make sure that this learning experience is as pleasurable and valuable for you. So I want to give you a couple of tips on the technology. You'll see in the upper left hand or upper middle corner of the screen, you can zoom in or zoom out depending on how much of the screen you want to see. And in the content viewer, where you're seeing my PowerPoint presentation, you're also going to be watching and listening as I play a video clip to introduce the 5 behaviors model. And then off to the right-hand side on your computer screen, you'll see a couple of areas where you can look at the participants, as well as what we're going to be using or asking you to use is the chat box. The chat box, if you're unfamiliar with it, is where you can actually type in a message in the blue bordered box at the bottom, send it to either all participants or host and panelists, and then it'll be a chance for you to answer some of the questions. I've got some quiz questions. I want to hear some of your responses throughout the hour, so we'll make it really fun and interactive. A little bit about Inspiring Solutions. It was a company that I started over 25 years ago, and through those years we've been blessed with working a variety of different organizations throughout the country in the area of strategic planning, leadership development, and employee engagement. We also have been a partner for Wiley, which is the authorized research and provider of everything DISC. I'm also been accredited on this program that you're going to be learning about today called the 5 Behaviors of a Cohesive Team. And many of you know that I've written books and a couple of videos on the area of attitudes in the workplace. And those are available out on our website. If you aren't familiar with all the different programs and products that we offer, you can go out to our website, inspiringsolutions.com. And there you can also download our new catalog. And if you'd like, we could also mail it to you. Just let Dana know, and she'll be happy to mail off a copy or two to you. So what are we going to do this hour? As many of you know, because we have a nice following and our roster continues to grow, so we thank you all for continuing to promote the value of this hour once a month. It's to give you and your team or your organization a monthly dose of motivation, and to expose you or introduce you to one of our inspiring programs and our products. And for this particular month, focusing in on the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team, you are going to be exposed to some of the exercises or projects that we do when we facilitate this team building experience. The teams that trust one another helps to engage in conflict around ideas. They learn how to commit to decisions. They are willing to hold one another accountable. And finally, a solid team is one in which they focus on achieving collective results. The handouts that were attached to the instructions are what we're going to be using as we go through this hour. The one in particular is the handout. It's got a number of different pages and worksheets that we're going to have you look at, read, complete. If you're there with a group, feel free to, I always say, stay after the webinar is over and get the group to either complete or further discuss some of these exercises because they're really valuable. And then, as always, we announce our upcoming webinar schedule. And you'll see that the webinar schedule has through June, but we don't currently have the second half of the year identified yet. which we will be doing prior to our next webinar. So what that means is when you finish with this morning's webinar, you'll be asked to complete a very short survey, which will give us feedback on what you thought about this experience this morning. But more importantly, we also want to know what your topics or needs are for upcoming webinar topics. So please fill that out, give us feedback and your suggestion. So for opening this particular program, I selected a quote from Andy Andrews about intentions. Intention without action is an insult to those who expect the best from you. So think about that. Who is it that expect something from you? If you're a manager or a supervisor, it could be your team. You might be on a group of, on a committee that perhaps you are responsible for leading. You might also think about the team in which you are serving on, and they expect something of you. You might also think of it from a personal perspective. In other words, your family, your children, your spouse, or even your friends. So what this gets you to think about is I think we all have good intentions to be the very best manager, to be the very best coach, to be the very best friend, to be the very best parent. However, sometimes our actions get in the way. So this kind of sets the stage to what are the behaviors of an effective team. So as you think about types of teams, here's some examples. There's sports teams, athletic teams, and many of you may have enjoyed watching, as I did, the Olympics. There's work teams, project teams, there's military teams, there's combat teams, there's race teams, and as I mentioned, you can even think about your family as a team. So with those examples in mind, what I'd like you to do is turn into the worksheet that has at the top your experience on teams. And this is where you're going to have a chance to type in the chat box your responses. I'd like for you to first of all type in your responses for what have been some of the qualities of the best teams you've been on. So when you think about those good teams, whether it's work teams, school teams, athletic teams, how would you describe them? And as you type into the chat box, hit send, and as they pop up on my screen, I'll read them for everybody's sake. All right, thank you, Ryan. Positive attitude. Stacy, good communication. Thank you. I'll get one more, and then we'll move on to the worst qualities. Ability to admit mistakes, and Ryan, we're going to talk about that, being vulnerable. So now let's look at what would you say are some of the qualities of the worst teams you've been a part of, where there's maybe frustration, a lack of cooperation or teamwork. Negative attitudes, absolutely. Thank you, Stacy. And attitudes could be about the topic, the project, the assignment. It could even be about each other. All right. Well, thank you for considering and describing those. We're now going to do another little exercise that gets you to think about what the survey would say. A survey was done on a variety of different teams in a variety of different organizations throughout the country, and they were asked 5 questions. And what I'd like you to do is guess, and you can record on your worksheet, out of 100%, what percent would you say yes to these questions? First one, when coworkers admit their mistakes, does it make you more likely to trust them? And out of 100, survey says 84% said yes, which is amazing. When you think about, I think it was Ryan who said that they're willing to admit their mistakes. allows you or helps you to trust them more. Second, do you think your workplace would be more effective if people were more frank with their opinions? In other words, if they are for or in favor of, or they don't like or disagree with a comment. Surveys said 71% of those surveyed felt that would be true. Third question, do you sometimes feel that teams' projects suffer because people aren't committed enough? In other words, they go through the motions or they aren't as willing to put forth the effort. Survey said 86% said yes. Fourth question, would your team be more effective if people were better at holding one another accountable? This is not just the leader's responsibility, but what if a peer confronted someone who didn't hold up to the bargain? Survey proved almost 90%, 89% said yes, that would be true. And then the last question was asked, in your work experience, have you seen projects suffer because people put their own needs in front of the team's? And survey said 87% would agree. So as you can tell in those 5 different areas, a team has a lot more potential if it is willing to behave in certain manners. Thus, the introduction of the 5 dysfunctions of a team. I'm curious, how many of you are familiar with or have read the book written by Patrick Lencioni, a New York Times bestseller? And if you would, just type in the chat box, yes or no. If you're interested, we have a supply of the books we can sell to you or send to you. You can also go out and buy it on Amazon. It's a wonderful book about a fable, and it teaches the 5 dysfunctions of a team. As a result of that book, the author, Patrick Lencioni, has partnered with Wiley, and they have created a training program that I've been certified in called the 5 Behaviors of a Cohesive Team. And on the next page in your workbook, you will see those 5 behaviors, and they were intentionally put or placed in the shape of a pyramid, because Patrick's belief in his research that it is fundamental to have trust in a relationship, let alone in a team, in order to effectively move on to resolve conflict, secure commitment, assure accountability in order to get the results. So what I'd like to do next is have you listen in to an introduction that describes what a team experiences and how these 5 behaviors affect a team, and be thinking about your team.
This is my team, my dysfunctional team. It may look pretty normal on the surface, but underneath, there are 5 things going on that need serious attention. Let's take a look. She can't ask for help. He doesn't want to risk starting an argument. He's only pretending that he's on board. That's me. I don't think it's my job to make sure he does his job. And he only cares about his own goals. So that's my team. Maybe your team has its own challenges. In his New York Times best-selling book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, Patrick Lencioni identifies 5 core dysfunctions that most teams face. The first dysfunction is an absence of trust among team members. This stems from their unwillingness to be vulnerable within the group. Vulnerability is about being able to say and genuinely mean things like, I screwed up, I need help, and I'm sorry. Team members who are not genuinely open with one another about their mistakes and weaknesses make it impossible to build a foundation for trust. This failure to build trust is damaging because it sets the tone for the second dysfunction, fear of conflict. Teams that lack trust are incapable of engaging in unfiltered and passionate debate of ideas. Instead, they resort to veiled discussions and guarded comments. A lack of healthy conflict ensures the third dysfunction, lack of commitment. Without airing their opinions in passionate and open debates, team members rarely, if ever, buy in and commit to decisions, though they may feign agreement during meetings. Teams that fail to get this commitment develop the fourth dysfunction, avoidance of accountability. Without committing to a clear plan of action, even the most focused and driven people often hesitate to call their peers on actions and behaviors that seem counterproductive to the good of the team. And this leads to the fifth dysfunction, inattention to results. Inattention to results occurs when team members put their individual needs, such as ego, career development, or recognition, above the collective goals of the team. Another way to understand this model is to take the opposite approach, a positive one, and imagine how members of truly cohesive teams behave. First, they trust each other. They engage in productive conflict around ideas. They commit to decisions and plans of action. They hold one another accountable for delivering against those plans. And they focus on the achievement of collective results. And that's it. These are the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. Each one is a deliberate choice made by the team. They do require discipline and persistence, but the payoff can be big. And there's a nice bonus. Not only will the group be stronger and more productive, but high-functioning teams are a lot more fun to work on.
All right, as you watched that video, perhaps you heard yourself being described. Maybe you heard elements of your team's personality being described. And through the team building experience, and there's some information on the next page in your workbook that describes that there's a lot of more, I would say, learning experiences than education. It's a lot of facilitation. On the front end, there is an assessment that each of the team members answers, and as a result of those responses, a team report is created, and that then helps us to explore the modules that are listed there. You'll see that we have split it up into bite-sized modules. So the first and the last are actually webinars done remotely for about an hour. And then modules 2 through 6, we have facilitated as 2 days. Sometimes it's 2 half days. We find that a lot of times, depending on the challenges that the teams face, a certain amount of time might be spent in module 2 or 3 to make sure that those are solid before we move on. And as I mentioned, one of the benefits of this process is self-disclosure and a way of looking at the composite of the entire team. So what you see on this screen is what the cover of the actual team report looks like, and then within the team report, using the pyramid, the 5 behaviors model, there's a score. And red indicating a low score performance, yellow being a medium level of performance, and green meaning that's a high performing team. And we facilitated this process with a variety of different teams and organizations in industries, and we just pulled one as an example where all but one was in the red, very low performing team. The only one that was in the medium was results. And this team we started working with had a lot of dissension, a lot of confusion, I think a lot of backstabbing, so there were some personality conflicts. And so through this process, I'm going to share with you what the rest of the story is, because at the end, after about 6 to 8 weeks, we then go back to the team, ask them to fill out similar questions and reassess the team, and you'll be amazed at how well this team did as a result of this process. So let's take a look. One of the back pages of this workbook are 2 pages known as a team action planning. And so if you want to kind of take a peek back there, for each of the teams we work with, one of the first assignments they are expected to complete as a team is to identify their purpose. It's a single statement that defines why that particular team exists. It's not an organizational mission statement. It's actually something that's much more specific. So let's say it's a dietary department, and so the purpose is to provide food service to our patients, residents, employees, and guests. Maybe you are a mortgage loan department, so perhaps it is responsible for securing, administering, and processing mortgage loans. Maybe you are, I'm trying to look at our examples of our attendees today, maybe you're a school. Maybe your department is responsible for the curriculum of a particular study. So whatever it is, narrows and clearly defines why your team exists. Then as a part of the learning, they're going to complete a DISC assessment as a part of the 5 behaviors. And each person on the team will understand what their natural strengths are. They'll also be identifying some of their shortcomings, or what we refer to as weaknesses. I'd much rather think of those as stretch behaviors. So in other words, maybe one of my strengths is that I'm direct, I'm focused, but some of my weaknesses or challenges is patience. So one of my stretch behaviors I would identify for the team's benefit would be to practice patience. And then the last exercise correlates to the area of conflict. This is where after the team understands its conflict style and the way in which it is either productive or unproductively managing conflict, they create a promise. And the promise is something that the team creates to commit to communicating and resolving conflict in a positive manner. So I give that as kind of a front-end piece to know that that is something that after each module, the team actually spends time and creates to apply what's learned. So let's take a look at the first behavior. The first behavior is to build trust. So going back into your workbook, the first notion of trust is to know that if you don't have trust, a team will most likely conceal or not admit its weaknesses or mistakes. They hesitate to ask others for help as well as offering to help others. They tend to jump to conclusions or assumptions, and they tend to hold grudges. In other words, thinking ill of other people or if their feelings were hurt. However, if you have a team that trusts one another, they are willing to admit their mistakes. They're willing to ask and offer for help. They're even graciously accepting and willing to hear feedback, things that are working well as things that could be improved. They tend to give each other the benefit of the doubt, thinking in terms of what the intention of the action was, regardless of maybe what was said or what was done. And they are willing to not only say, I'm sorry, or accept apologies. And in order to do that, it really takes individuals on the team to be vulnerable. When you have a team that is uses vulnerability-based trust, I think it takes a mature team member to be willing to be vulnerable, as well as knowing that it is safe and it is comfortable for them to express their vulnerability. So what is vulnerability? I looked up the definition yesterday, and I put in here that's an adjective, and there's 2 interesting definitions. The first one talks about when you are susceptible to physical or emotional attack or harm. In other words, we are, or I am, in a vulnerable position. The second definition I thought was interesting. It means that you are in need of special care, support, or protection because of age, disability, or risk of abuse or neglect. Now, if you think about it, there's extremes, but I want you to also think about it just on a day-to-day basis. Who doesn't want some support? Who wouldn't want protection? It's a basic need that we all have. And then at the bottom, I jotted down some synonyms of the word vulnerable. including helpless, defensiveless, powerless, weak, or susceptible. So what does vulnerability mean to you? First of all, I'd like for you to answer today, and again in the team building exercise, we have you discuss this with your team. How do you feel when someone expresses their vulnerability? When they say things like, I'm sorry, or I made a mistake, I don't know, I need your help, or I'm sad or disappointed. And I had a perfect opportunity to be vulnerable last night. Dana and I went to the Miranda Lambert concert, and it was last minute. We got to the arena, and parking is always such a challenge in any of the arenas, but we wanted to make sure that we got a close spot. Well, unfortunately, I suggested that we park in a private, permit only, and it was clearly marked. And when we came out after the conference, or after the concert, the cars were gone. It had gotten towed, and it clearly had said if parking illegally, operators would be towed at their own expense. So I had to express my vulnerability, big mistake, huge mistake, and once again, I apologize. I'm sorry, Dana. Never again will I ever park in a no parking zone. So next question is, why then would it be difficult for us to express their vulnerability? If you would, let's try this in a chat box. And I know, Sarah, thank you for typing in on the response to the first question there. Why is it difficult for you to express or to expose yourself vulnerably? And I'm sorry, I think I just missed one come in. It comes up fast on my screen, and then I missed it. So if Dana is listening in, if you want to chime in on any of these responses as well.
Yeah. Heather said fear of judgment.
Thank you. Absolutely.
And
we don't want
they're being open and allowing for others to be open as well.
Great. Thank you for considering, and thank you for chiming in. What would a team gain if members were more willing to be vulnerable? And again, I think you'd have greater trust, respect. You'd be more willing to admit your mistakes if others were as well. And when we do our retreat or this team building exercise, on the next page, there is a very powerful activity that explores people's past. They actually answer and describe where they grew up, how many siblings they have, and where they fell in the pecking order, and what, if anything, was unique about that childhood experience. Well, I'll just give you a brief example of mine. I am the oldest of two kids. My brother is 6 years younger, so in a sense, we are only children. And one of the things that I think I learned and realized was that I oftentimes wanted to take in charge. My brother didn't talk until he was about 5. My parents were concerned because he didn't speak, and his later comment was, well, Mick was my nickname. Mick always did the talking for me. And I think that, and I'm sure Dana and Sarah can attest, I'm not afraid to speak up. That I think probably has stayed with me for a long time. And as a part of that upbringing, you can also learn how that carries over to your day-to-day. Now, we can't do that with our webinar today, but I thought we would have some fun with this exercise. Listed here are 20 different activities that you may have done. You may have also gotten caught doing it by your parents, caught doing it by the law. Some people oftentimes don't know what ding-dong ditch is, number 9. Maybe it's a Midwestern thing, but ding-dong ditch, if you've never done it, was something that we did as a kid. We'd go up to a house at night, we'd ring the doorbell, and then we'd hide. And then we got the biggest kick out of the fact that they'd turn on their light and look outside and there'd be no one there. So go figure. Now, if you would, thank you, Dana. Adding the toad is another trip. My total is 190. What is yours? I'll give you a couple minutes to add those up. It's the same number whether you did it once or 5 times. And I think the total is out of 250. All right, thank you, Stacy, 90. It's always interesting to learn how adventurous our team members are. Thank you, Sarah, at 80. And the notion with this exercise is, are you willing not only to admit it from a numeric perspective, but to talk about it and share the story about it? And it comes from the point of being vulnerable or being exposed. All right, way to go, Dana, rocking it at 180. My Louise, Thelma and Louise. All right, so what is the value of being vulnerable? All right, thank you, Ryan, at 150. There is great truth when you trust someone. And if you aren't able to share some of your own truths, you may be hindering yourself, your potential, as well as your teams. And so again, thinking in terms of being vulnerable and sharing these truths can help your team. Now on the next page, this is an exercise that's built into the assessment using the everything DISC model. And if some of you are familiar with DISC, what I'd like you to do is type in the chat box, what is your style, D-I-S-C, or maybe you're a combination. In some cases, you have a prominent or dominant, or I should say primary style followed by a secondary style. So if you're not familiar with how to use this instrument, let me give you at least some quick understandings. You'd ask yourself to understand if you are fast-paced or slower-paced. So put your finger in the upper or lower half of the page. Then the second question you ask, do you tend to question or challenge information, or do you accept or respond to people? And depending on where you were, go to either to the left or to the right. And then in each of the quadrants, you'll see, for instance, the D stands for dominance. If you are a dominant person, you have self-confidence, you're direct, forceful, and you take risks. You're motivated by power and authority, competition, winning, and success. You have the fear, losing control, being taken advantage of, or being vulnerable. And last is describes the limitation. People that have a high D they have a lack of concern for others, they're impatient, and they can be insensitive. If you are a high S, high S's stands for influence, or high I's, I'm sorry. If you are high in this area, you'll notice you're charming, you're enthusiastic, you're social, you're optimistic, and you're talkative. You're motivated by social recognition, group activities, friendly relationships. You fear social rejection, disapproval, or loss of influence, being ignored. And some of your limitations in a team setting is that you can be impulsive, you can be disorganized, and you may lack follow-through. If you have a degree of steadiness, or S, which, by the way, the majority of the world's population are S's, you'll notice that you are patient, you're a good team player, you have a calm approach, you're a good listener, you're humble, you're motivated by stable environments, sincere appreciation, cooperation, opportunities to help others, which makes them good team members. You fear loss of stability, change, loss of harmony, or offending others, hurting their feelings. And some of their limitations in team settings is that they can be over-accommodating, which means they may not express what's important to them. They tend to avoid change or indecisive. And then finally, if you are a high C, or if you're high in the area of conscientiousness, you are precise, you're analytical, you're skeptical, you are more reserved and quiet, you're motivated by opportunities to use your expertise or gain knowledge, you pay attention to quality in your work and others, you fear being criticized or slipshod, that's hard for me to say today, slipshod methods, being wrong. And finally, some of your challenges or limitations in team setting is that you can be overly critical of others' work and tend to be over-analytical and tend to isolate themselves. So what's interesting about this assessment is not only will you understand your style, but you'll also know where your teammates are. So if on the screen, if you're watching, on the PowerPoint screen, you'll see in this circle the abbreviations of the 8 members of this particular team that we facilitated. So you kind of can see that there's a nice mixture. And then from that awareness, we talk about what that means to yourself, what that means to others, how do you adapt your behavior, how can you bring out the best of yourself and others to maximize relationships. Quick quiz, true or false, or yes or no. The most successful teams have very little conflict. True or false, or yes or no. All right, Stacy is correct. False. Successful teams have conflict, and they are able to do something with it. Oops, I just gave you that one away. It's bonus. Bonus on Friday. Best teams are made up of people who are comfortable passionately arguing their ideas. Now, you'll take a note. The definition of conflict is based around a conflict of ideas. Unfortunately, when I'm working with organizations, departments, teams, so many of their conflict is focusing in on the person or the personality. And we try to help them separate the conflict, not about the person, but about the behavior or the performance, or, as this description describes, the ideas. So before we move on to the next behavior, what I want you to acknowledge is that in this first half hour of this webinar, we have been focusing in on trust. And like the pyramid illustrates, a team must spend time assuring that there is trust before they are able to move on. And we find that this is true in the balance of time that we spend in a team building retreat. So let's take a look at the next page. Building upon what we learned about our style using the DISC model, this conflict strategy map takes a look at when we are in conflict, how we tend to respond. So working from the inside out, let's take a look at, say, the DI or the ID, which happens to be my style. When in conflict, in a conflict, can address issues head on, which means I'm not afraid to address or help clients identify or a team understand what the issues are. That's probably the consultant in me. However, the outer circle describes the unhealthy behavior that I might demonstrate when during conflict. And that says that I might say things that he or she would regret. And I know full well that that's true. I've oftentimes spoken before I've thought. In other words, I put my foot in my mouth. My coach says that oftentimes I tend to vomit my words, and then I have to go out and clean it up afterwards. And so I think it's important for you to understand, given your style, what might be an unhealthy way of dealing with conflict, and then learn how to stop, reframe, and respond in a more productive manner. In fact, we have a new tool that Wiley just rolled out called the Everything DISC Productive Conflict. And what it does, it helps people understand the why. Why might you respond in an unproductive or an unhealthy manner? And then once you understand that or understand your intentions, you can shift your thoughts and your actions or behavior to being more productive. How tolerant are you, or how do you feel about conflict is important. On the next page in your worksheet, I'd like for you to complete an exercise that this assessment does to understand what's acceptable or unacceptable at conflict at work. So for those 7 different areas or responses to conflict of others, I'd like for you to check mark if it's something that is unacceptable, tolerable, or perfectly acceptable when at work. And by doing so, you are now aware of how you feel to different responses in conflict. And then in the team building exercise, it's actually plotted. So if you can see on my screen, it may be hard to read the numbers, that of the 8 people that responded, how their responses varied. And then also the far right column indicated if the team members felt as though that was something that they actually did themselves. So you could imagine what kind of dialogue or discussion this would create. And as a result of that unit or that module, the assignment on the action planning is to create a promise. A promise is a list of 3 to 5 ground rules that describe, that are created by the team of acceptable and unacceptable behaviors when the team is in conflict. So for instance, our team, Inspiring Solutions, although there's only 3 of us, we are small but mighty. We have gone through this process as a team, and we have created these promises. In fact, we even have them on a poster in our office, and then every time we do our strategic planning or team huddles, we read these to just remind ourselves of this promise. So first is to be sensitive to the tone and delivery of comments and questions, to make sure that we're not just saying words, but to be attentive to the emotion behind the words. The second talks about not only providing the facts, but the logic or the why and the emotions, because sometimes, I know from my perspective, I focus on the facts and I don't oftentimes listen for the feelings behind someone's comment. Be willing to express your feelings and needs about a situation. Work to find the third solution to accommodate all parties' interests. And what that means is, let's say that Dana's got an idea and I have a different idea. What we'll do is, sometimes we ask Sarah to chime in and help us with the third solution, but this also means that understand what each other wants and come up with something that's maybe a fair solution to accommodate both of our interests. Find a balance between passionate. Sometimes we can be a little bit passionate or excited or loud when in conflict or when we're communicating with each other, as well as the importance of being patient or more calming when communicating during conflict. And then the last we recently added when we did our update, and that is to remember to listen to understand, not to respond. So this is a great exercise for teams to understand how you want to communicate, especially during conflict. The third behavior of a cohesive team is commitment. Let's take a look at how commitment impacts a team. When team members are able to offer opinions and freely and honestly debate ideas, they will be more likely to commit to decisions. So you can see that in order to move into the commitment stage, they have to have trust and be willing to understand conflict. It's not necessary to achieve consensus, so you might not have 100% agreement, but you do want clarity and buy-in. What that means is you might, as a team, have a promise to agree to disagree. But as a unified team, once you leave the meeting, you can't throw anybody under the bus, or you can't have the meeting after the meeting and talk badly or talk down about a decision that was made. It's no fair. You have to express your concerns during the meeting so the team has privy to your thoughts and concerns. So how do you do that? I'd like for you on the next page to answer the true-false questions there about your commitment at work. So think about a team that you're serving on, department team, project team, school team, family team, and think about your commitment to this team. And then once again, sharing those with your team might help them understand the needs. Because if a team fails to commit, there's a lot of ambiguity amongst the team members. They oftentimes will miss opportunities because they're spending so much time on analysis or waiting for someone to make a decision. They can breed a lack of confidence because They don't know what they are empowered. If you talk about empowerment in the workplace, a lot of times when people feel as though they have to wait for someone to make a decision, they will sit back and wait. Or perhaps they've made a mistake, and so there's a retaliation and there's a fear of failure. A team that fails to commit oftentimes revisits or reviews or rehashes discussions or decisions because they don't have closure or they don't have commitment. And finally, they oftentimes will encourage second guessing among the team members. So in the absence of someone or a team making a collective decision, they say, well, what did we think? Let's just make the decision and go for it ourselves. However, if a team is committed to a decision, they have much more clarity around direction and priorities. And what this means is they're able to align around common objectives. And I'll give you an example. We were given the opportunity to submit an RFP, or request for proposal, at a conference coming up. And one of the things that we have identified in our strategic planning is that we are going to focus our energies in serving our niche industry, that being healthcare and financial services. Not to say that we wouldn't honor requests coming from others, and we do, and I know many of you are in other industries. However, from a proactive perspective, we agreed, in fact, I commended Dana on bringing it to my attention. If that RFP does not put us in front of those industries, it's probably not a good use of our time. A team that commits is able to learn from their mistakes, and I think sometimes our greatest lessons are learned from mistakes. They move forward without hesitation, and as a result, they're able to quickly respond, or they're nimble in the workplace, which gives them a competitive edge. Now, the fourth behavior is about accountability, and I want to make sure that you are clear when we talk about accountability. Accountability, when I do a lot of leadership development, is the leader's responsibility to make sure that they hold themselves and their team accountable. This builds upon that platform, but also looks to peer accountability. On the next page in your worksheet, if you're following along, there are a couple of questions that I would have the team explore. So in other words, in what ways do team members fail to hold one another accountable? So maybe you tolerate missed deadlines, or maybe you expect some people to do more work because others complain and they get out of doing the work. So there's an imbalance of accountability. What do you observe? Well, what happens is that there can be some resentment, people feeling as though they're carrying the weight of the team. Or why does Mary or why does Joe always get out of not doing what they're supposed to do? And the reason that this is important is it can truly affect the team's productivity. So what I'd like you to do is on the bottom half of this worksheet, I'd like for you to think about, of these 10 different strategies, which one, I'd like for you to identify your top 3, which would be the best strategies to help you and your team with its accountability. And then I'm going to have you actually type in the chat box the one that you identified to be the most helpful, number 1. And as you're doing that, I'm just going to read through the list. Would it be to call one another on unproductive behaviors, or give one another feedback, good, bad, or otherwise? Have clear priorities and goals. That was one that came up quite a bit in this morning's first hour. Review progress against goals during meetings. You set the goals, but you ever go back and follow up to see how well you're progressing? Have more efficient and effective, productive meetings. So much of our corporate time is spent in meetings. Are we making good use of that time? Following through on commitments that you've made to yourself, to your team, to the project. Address missed deadlines immediately. So again, making sure that you have some type of system that says this is due today or this is due this week. Being more direct, what you need, not being vague. Publicly sharing goals with each other, with the team, and its progress. And then finally, spending more time together. This might be a personal objective. All right, so Stacy types in, have clear priorities and goals. Thank you. Others that you would say would be your number 1 or best strategy for shared accountability. And as a result of this exercise and completing the profile, a team would be naturally able to do that. Comparing progress, Sarah says, with original goals. Thank you. All right, well, in this module, I teach an exercise to give people feedback, holding them accountable using a balanced feedback model. So let me teach you. It is a balanced feedback, but it avoids the but. And I just used the but. The but mom is one where you say something like, well, you're doing a great job, but something's not working quite right. And the reason that the but bomb is so detrimental to the person's confidence or accepting your feedback is it negates the compliment. You may have just as well saved your breath because whatever you complimented them on was out the door. And would be a better transition word because it adds value to the feedback. You can use other transitional words to help coach or improve, such as may I suggest, I'd recommend, or perhaps you could. And let's hear how that might sound. There are a couple of elements of this balanced feedback model. First of all, you face the person because that shows sincerity and genuine interest in their well-being. You want to use their first name because it's the sweetest sound to our voice or our ears. You want to, first of all, start off with something that you appreciate about what they do or what they've done and why it's important. And then you transition into something that you would like them to change or do differently or offer a suggestion. So here's how it would sound. Pat, I appreciate your attention to details. This helps us to not overlook anything. May I suggest you share your constructive feedback during our team meetings? Now, the way that you would think about this could be from Pat sharing critical comments. Because Pat, if he or she is attentive to details, he probably or she probably nitpicks. So rather than attacking them on that behavior, you want to talk about in trying to figure out what you really want Pat to do. What would be your intentions? So that's where really the whole importance of thinking about your intention comes into play. So you say, okay, you're great at the attention to details. Could we make good use of your attention to details during our meetings? So offering suggestive feedback. So can you tell that if you were Pat, this would come across not as an attack or set you on a defensive mechanism, but more acknowledging that you've got something to offer. We want to hear it. Let's make sure that it's constructive. And then the last behavior of the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team is to help the team achieve its results. Because a team that's not focused on result is stagnant, it fails to grow, they rarely defeat their competition because they're not thinking ahead or trying new things. They oftentimes will lose achievement-oriented employees because they want to be in a team that is productive or moving forward and without being frustrated. They encourage team members to focus on their own careers and individual goals. So if it's not clear what's important to the team, the individuals will say, well, I may as well focus on what I can impact, that being things that I have influence. And sometimes they can be easily distracted, not being clear on what's important. So therefore, the reason that we want teams to be productive and focused on results is that you'll be not only able to recruit, but also retain high-performing employees. You will be able to minimize individualistic behaviors because they'll think on what's best for the team. They enjoy and celebrate the team's success. And they know that if they fall or they fumble or they make a mistake, they suffer collectively. They don't throw each other under the bus, or they don't place blame to others or other areas. They benefit from individuals who overcome their own interests for the good of the team. In other words, they're willing to forego what's important to them individually, but to do it, take one for the team. And these teams are also very focused, avoiding distractions. Distractions could be anything from non-productive activities that can be a waste of time. They take a look at and they focus on what are the things or activities that I need that's going to give the highest return on our investment. Now, if any of you are following the NCAA in March Madness, you know that one of the things that we watch to keep up on our teams is a score. The score tells us each quarter, each period, how much time is left in a particular period. So how much time does the team have to produce or win? It also, on the scoreboard, talks about fouls. So fouls can be areas of mistakes that a team has made. And I also look at timeouts from a team perspective as a chance, in fact, in healthcare, many of you are familiar with what we call service huddles. You know, it's that time out in a busyness of a day where you just kind of catch your breath and you say, okay, what's working, what's not, and what can we do to better improve our strategy? So during this team building exercise, we'll take a look at what are your goals or your priorities. How do you know that you are making good progress in those areas? What are the measures? And then what are some of the ways in which you are going to measure those goals? And I'll give you an example. Inspiring Solutions commits to strategic planning on a regular basis. And we have a variety of different goals. Some are financially driven, so we use our balance sheet and income statement to monitor our progress in achieving our goals. We also look at the quality of our learning experiences. So like today, we will ask you to fill out an evaluation, and we use and we track the average scores so that we are measuring our performance. So that, once again, would be an assignment that the team would commit to. On the action planning worksheet, you'll see the next page has the first page that we've covered already, and then the second or the next page of the action planning worksheet takes a look at, first of all, what are the priorities that this team needs to work on or complete in the next 3 months to give it real clarity on its focus. And then the last section correlates to that fifth behavior. What would be the proof? In other words, what would be the desired results that would indicate that your team is working its purpose, overcoming its conflict, assuring accountability, and focused on what matters most to the team's effectiveness. Then, as I mentioned, after, say, 6 weeks or so, we come back to the team. We will ask each individual to assess how they feel the team has been doing over the last duration, implementing the action or strategies from the worksheet as well as what was learned in the retreat. And as I mentioned, I wanted to give you a follow-up on that team that we started to work with. As you can see, they improved significantly in all 5 of the areas, going from red to yellow, low to medium, in 3 areas, and they made a huge jump in the area of results and commitment. So for any of you organizations that are looking for tangible, measurable feedback on the impact that training has on its teams, this is a great program to implement or facilitate. If you want more information, the very last page of your worksheet or workbook has the description of the 5 behaviors as a program. It's a great team building experience. If you would like to talk more about your team or its challenges, I'm happy to give you some advice or make some recommendations. Also, if you would like a sample of a team report, Colin and Dana would be happy to send out a sample report that you could take a look at. But I would love the opportunity to help build your team's effectiveness. If you have any questions, please let us know. And again, we encourage you and continue to pass along our upcoming dates. Next month, we're going to talk about emotional intelligence in May. I hope you can take time to manage your time. And then in June, we're going to develop some listening skills using 5 different approaches. As I mentioned at the end, feel free to not only give us your comments, but offer some suggestions for future topics. We'll be updating our schedule next month. So in closing, I want to thank you on behalf of our team for joining us, and close with a verse from the Irish May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your fields until we meet again. May God hold you in the hollow of his hands. Have a great weekend. Make sure you wear green tomorrow or you'll get pinched. Bye for now.